And against the question, I thought I'd start with what's right about the food system. So what is good, and what do we value in it? I always like to start my speeches with an 18th century radical priest. Does anyone know who this is? I'm not quite that old. No, this is Thomas Malthus. Yeah, Malthus. And I don't know how many people know him, but he was an 18th century British, English priest, and he was a geographer. And he basically said, look, his insight was population is doing this. People are having so many children, but so population grows like this. People have 4, 6 children, and it grows out of control. Food production does this. It grows over time, and you can use more land, and you can do it slightly more efficiently, but you will never be able to keep up food production with population growth. And so his quote was, "The superior power of population cannot be checked without producing misery or vice." So again, nice uplifting stuff. I think I'm doing the right tone. But without, if you don't control population, if you let population grow, there won't be enough food. People will starve, and there'll be mass famine. Population comes down. You bring it back into balance. So this was his core insight, and he's kind of the founder of a lot of sort of geographical thinking and population thinking because this key insight of his. If he was right, well, we'll see by the end of the presentation. But certainly he had a very strong view. On one level, he wasn't right. So he was living here in the 1750s when population was maybe 700 million globally. And now we are, I think we just passed 8 billion, I think, a few days ago. Yeah, so there's 8 billion people on the world, 12, 13 times what it was when Thomas Malthus was writing his uplifting materials. And with projections as they are, it looks like we will be at 11 billion by 2100, 22nd century. So huge increase, and obviously we know population growth is coming down, but this is, yeah, he was there living in the east of England, saying, look, this land can't support any more people. We're done. And here we are with potentially 20 times what the population he lived with. So he was wrong on that level. And why was he wrong? Well, and I don't know how well you can see this, but this is the production of grain per hectare across really different countries in different parts of the world. It doesn't really matter the specifics. What you can see is the trend is all up, right? So a production over, and it starts from 1900 through to the present day. And you can see in each and every geography, the production of food has just dramatically increased. 3-4 times what it was in 1900 it is now. So massive expansion in food production going alongside that population. At the same time, if he was right, many people would have starved, and many people would have died from starvation. Actually, prevalence of undernourishment in developing countries from 1970 to 2015 has come down from maybe 36% down to 12%. I mean, it's an astonishing achievement. It's a huge, in terms of things we should be proud of as a species. This is wonderful. We are feeding our population in poorer parts of the world and giving better qualities of life. This is global. This is global data. I can find you the developing countries' names if you want. But this is all developing countries across the world, down from 36 to 12%. It's a huge achievement. So that's good. So the population has increased. We're feeding them. The other thing that's happened is that food has become dramatically cheaper. And what people can afford has become dramatically cheaper. So this is Our World in Data is the best website for food data, by the way. So if you, I spent a few hours there the other day, you may realize. But this is for an American working 1 hour in the manufacturing sector. So their salary they get for 1 hour's work in manufacturing. What can you buy? And in 1901, you could buy an egg. right? By 2003, you could buy 12 eggs. So the purchasing power of your salary means you can buy so much more food and consume so much more than you could then. So we've had population growth, we've had increase in production, and food is much cheaper. So these are, this is the question, are these good things? Well, yes, on some level they are good things. We're feeding people and we're feeding them cheaply. So just to summarize, the world's population has skyrocketed, but food provision improved at the same time. But of course, the only way this could be achieved was by modernizing agriculture around the world. That's the term they use, and completely transforming our agricultural system. So those are some of the things that were right about it. What's wrong with the agricultural system? So this is a picture of my grandfather. I warned some people this was coming. He's the one on the left there. I think he's managing I think it's lettuces. I don't quite know. But he was part of the food system. This is Hardwick in the east of England, 1958. He ran the shop here in the village, providing all the food and products that people needed. And it was the only shop in the village, so this is where people got their consumption. But a very proud member of the food system. I think it's worth drawing, what I want to draw your attention to is this situation up here, which if I zoom in on, there's a box of DDT on the top shelf, right? So this thing here is a fruitcake. So this was the people of the village when they'd done a day's work. They're like, you know what I want? I want a snack. I want a lovely piece of fruitcake. So my grandfather had this really nice fruitcake made, and he sold slice by slice, and he kept it here underneath the DDT for years. And obviously there was a downward motion of deadly chemical into this snack. And my father, when he was young, remembers my grandfather picking up the cake, dusting off the DDT and cutting slices of it. Right? So this is not ideal. But DDT, I think the inventor of DDT got a Nobel Prize for his contributions to the world, because sorry? To the cake, yeah, indeed, it was very delicious after that, I imagine. But DDT had profound impacts on typhus and other diseases, and it was an incredibly effective pesticide, and really improved production, and in the village, clearly having DDT in the local shop as a core thing that people sold. But I think for me, this is quite helpful in understanding what's wrong with the food system. There was no recognition of the consequences of this. So this chemical, which seemed so wonderful and was producing such good results so quickly, what were the long-term effects of using this? And indeed, no one, who knows what the effects on the local population of Hardwick of this cake was, but it wasn't good. So the short-term, and these revolutions we saw in terms of agricultural production and food production, they led to poor consequences and other consequences. And so what are they? Well, the first big problem that it led to is the health of our society and the health outcomes. So increased commoditization of food, increased production, mechanization, industrialization. Lots more food, very cheap. But look what happens, right? Your obesity rates, I mean, it couldn't be clearer, right? From 1970 through to 2016, it's just an unending rise, and it's still going up. We know about this now. We know that these things are problems, but it's still going up, and it's still destructive. And there are many other health outcomes we could talk about. Undernutrition in certain aspects, stunting. Even though people are eating enough, they're not getting the right nutrients. And we heard earlier about the nutrient quotas or content of various vegetables and how we establish that. But certainly, problem one is that for all this increase in production and reduction in cost, it's not making us healthier. It's making us much less healthy. Problem two is really our connection to food. So this is a supermarket. You walk in there, there's products all around. There's lovely packaged pieces of meat. You have no idea of the source. You have no idea how it was produced. We were just talking about it. Same point. You don't understand. And you talked about brands. Actually, brands almost obscure the reality of where the food has come from. They're almost a different set of messages to make you think differently about a piece of food rather than where it's come from. And so if that is how you consume most of your food and where you buy most of your food, of course you're not going to understand where it's come from. And if you don't understand where it's come from, how can you understand your effect on the system or its effect on you? And obviously I was comparing that to, this place. Sorry for the promotion. But no, I mean, at least here you understand, you can see who grew it, you connect through to it. And for us, when we were looking at the investment, this was one of the most important features, was that you were enabling a consumer to really understand where their food had come from. So in the UK, a survey a couple of years ago found 1/4 of adults had never been on a farm in their entire life. 1/3 of children didn't know pork came from pigs. And actually 1 in 25 children thought potatoes came from pigs. So if you've got people with such poor conception of where their food comes from, something they eat 3 times a day, often more, especially if you're me, but no real sense of where it's come from, how can you make good decisions? How can you really prioritize these things effectively? The third point, and we've talked a lot about this, and I don't need to talk about this in detail, but is the environmental impact of the food system. Over half of agricultural land is degraded. It accounts for 70% of fresh water use. It's responsible for 80% of deforestation. 1/3 of GHGs come from farming and are released by farming. And this is obviously, we are all very concerned about carbon and what the emissions mean for the future. And agriculture, I think, is the second or third biggest contributor. Biodiversity loss, 70% biodiversity loss, half biodiversity loss in seas. So I know these are things this audience certainly know, but it's the third and serious problem. And just one more graph. This is soil degradation and soil threat in Europe. And it's not a good picture, right? You want to see more green than red, and you see mainly red. And I think particularly in where I'm currently based in the Netherlands, you see a lot of red, and it's reflected really in the conversations people are having and farmers are having about their future and their ability to keep producing. It's serious degradation to our soils. So that's point 3. Point 4, and this is, we heard yesterday all about the sort of depopulation of rural Spain. This is where I'm from, and that's a depopulation of the north of England. And it's a very common sight. And that is a result of poor economic outcomes for those in the system, and inevitable outcomes. And I don't know, are you familiar with James Rebanks in the room? No? He's a farmer and writer based in the north of England, and what he talks about is how the food system and the commoditized food system, the core economic drivers of this over 50 years have just pushed farmers to make all these fairly destructive decisions incrementally, often not knowing, often not realizing how the conventional system was really changing the whole economic cycle, but the kind of the logic of it and how you really can't fight it. It's so hard to fight it and be economically sustainable. And so the problem here is the way we've set up the economic chain does not support sustainable farming and sustainable food production. The way we've set it up is exploitative and extractive. And that's exactly to the conversation you just had on those matters. And I love his quote, farming for nature is economic suicide. Produce meat at a greater cost than intensively produce chicken or pork, and you're considered an anachronism, an eccentric, crazy on the supermarket shelf. I have to ignore my accounts in this bid for good husbandry and hope the rest of the world comes to its senses one day. So he spends most of his time off his farm, earning money so he can subsidize what he believes are sustainable practices. So the economic piece. And then the final problem is just the sheer complexity and the complexity of these issues we're dealing with. And I don't know, does anyone know who oh well, his name's on the page, on the photo. So this is Ancel Keys, and he discovered the link between fat and heart disease. So he produced a study in the 60s which then drove huge amounts of public policy, of food production, of all these things, saying, fat is the problem, fat is the problem. Actually, and he took 7 countries. I think Japan was one that had very low fat, very low heart disease, and the US, high fat, high heart disease, and he said, look, this is the correlation, this is the truth. The problem was when people ran his numbers with more countries, so that this is on the left, is what he established, clear trend line. So you've got heart deaths per 1,000 of population on the left, and percentage of dietary calories from fat on the bottom. Japan, bottom left. Low deaths, low calories from fat. US at the top right. High deaths, high calories from fat. Simple, right? Point proven. We understand we should eat less fat. Actually, when you introduce more countries, that wasn't the case at all. There was no relationship eventually. And actually, this country here is the Netherlands. So this is where I live, and this is a high-fat consumption diet with low heart disease. And it's just one example, and we were talking about the great conversation about the content of nutrients within regeneratively farmed food as opposed to non-regeneratively farmed food, and then how is that absorbed by the body, all these kind of questions. These are just incredibly hard issues to understand and to solve. And this is just one example of where sort of a clear solution, a clear answer, actually, when you really dug into the detail, drove the wrong policy results and drove even more problems in our food system. So, a lot of problems, right? So just to recap, health of our society, human health outcomes. Second, our connection to food. Thirdly, the environmental outcomes. Fourthly, the economic outcomes for those in the system. And fifthly, the complexity of the system itself and getting answers to it. So, was he right? Was he right? Partially, exactly. Yeah, no, well, I mean, it's all up for people's opinions, but no, I think he was partially right. No, he wasn't right. We didn't have the famines and the death. Population wasn't controlled that way, but actually, in producing so much more food, we have created other problems, other miseries, other vices, which we're living through the consequences and are only going to increase. So, partially right. I think a final point is there any hope? So this is from a Triodos piece of work, saying how do we want the food system to change? And I've described what was broken, but in order to change it, those 3 areas: balanced ecosystems, we need to think about, inclusive prosperity, so the economic piece, and healthy society, so individual health and relationship to food. And it has to be all 3 of those. You have to think about the whole thing together. You can't, I think you were saying before, if you just focus on one thing, you'll get totally the wrong incentives. And we see that already with some of the businesses we've looked at investing in, very, very focused maybe on being a meat alternative, but actually what's going into the product, how processed is it, how much sugar, how much fat, and not dealing with the overall issues. So we believe a transition is possible. Solutions must be holistic. They must think about all these things. They must be long-term, and my day job is that I provide capital to do that. so there's a final plug for me. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed pictures of 18th century priests and my grandfather. Yeah, happy to do any questions or there we are. Thanks.